In the memory of history, they were humble warrior monks, the Knights Templar, their official mission to protect Christian pilgrimages on the dusty, dangerous road to Jerusalem. The accepted story tells of piety, bravery, and finally, their tragic betrayal and brutal destruction at the hands of a greedy king. But that is the story told to the masses. Hidden within that legend, concealed from prying eyes, is another story. A story whispered in the shadows of ancient monasteries. A legend of murder, unsolved mystery, and a buried treasure beyond all imagination. A secret, powerful enough to rewrite all of human history and change the course of the world forever. The truth is, the Knights Templar were in Jerusalem, and they did protect the pilgrims. But that was just their cover. A skillfully arranged veil to hide their true purpose. The real mission, the real reason they were in the Holy Land, was completely different. They did not come to protect the faith. They came to find something ancient, something powerful. They were searching for the lost technology of a world faded into oblivion. As soon as they arrived in the Holy Land, as soon as they were granted access to the most sacred place, the Knights Templar began to dig. To understand their secret mission, we must go back even further, beyond their official founding date in 1118. Our real story begins many years earlier, not in Jerusalem, but in the heart of a mighty empire, Constantinople, the city of golden domes and guarded secrets, now Istanbul. Deep within these ancient city walls, a secret society called the Brothers of the East had been founded in Greece before establishing its headquarters here. They were not sword-wielding warriors. They were scholars of the unseen. They practiced alchemy, seeking to transform not only metal, but the human soul. They studied sacred geometry, believing the Creator had built the universe with precise numbers and geometric laws. They performed complex rituals and rites, combining astrology, astronomy, music, and mathematics to seek harmony with the cosmos. And then, in the early 12th century, a French nobleman named Hugh de Payens sought them out. De Payens was a fascinating figure. Outwardly, he was a devout Catholic, like most of Europe at the time. But his family had deep connections to the Sufi faith, a more mystical, esoteric branch of Islam focused on direct experience with God. De Payens had heard tales of this secret group, a group said to possess and protect a trove of ancient knowledge. Driven by an irrepressible curiosity, he wanted to meet them for himself. This was a time of extreme turmoil. Europe was mired in darkness. Kingdoms rose, fell, and constantly warred with one another. In the East, Muslims and Christians were clashing violently in the bloody crusades. The world seemed to be tearing itself apart. And yet, amidst that chaos, the Brothers of the East possessed a calm wisdom. They seemed unconcerned with contemporary politics, with the wars for land and power. They had a purpose, far more important. After mutual trust was established, after oaths and tests of loyalty, the Brotherhood told the European visitors their story. No, not their story, but the story. The story of an ancient civilization that had flourished thousands upon thousands of years before the pyramids were built. A people who were extremely spiritually developed and also extremely technologically advanced. It was a civilization that had eliminated poverty. Material wealth had become meaningless. They had devised sophisticated cultivation methods, ensuring every citizen was well fed. They could control the weather. Drought and famine were impossibilities. To Hugh de Payens, a man of the Middle Ages, this civilization possessed abilities that sounded like miracles, like pure magic. They could communicate over vast distances instantly. Somehow, they had a method to levitate objects no matter how large or heavy. They possessed medicine that could cure all disease, allowing people to live very long lives in perfect health. War did not exist. Resources were so abundant that anyone could have anything they wanted. And what these people desired most was to pursue their own spiritual paths, to explore the mysteries of the universe. And then, in a single day and night, they vanished. Hugh de Payens, a soldier, a nobleman, a practical man, was captivated and skeptical. He asked a simple question, but one that carried the weight of a world. How? How could a civilization so powerful, a civilization that seemed to command the very laws of nature, be completely wiped out? The Brotherhood's answer was cold and final. They said that in one fateful day and night, the ground began to shake. New volcanoes rose from the earth and erupted violently, blackening the sky with ash. And then, a massive cataclysm, a great wall of water, swept across the earth and destroyed it all. Everything, every city, all knowledge, every life was washed away. And that is when Hugh de Payens and his 8 companion knights first heard the name that had echoed through the millennia like a whisper, a forgotten myth, Atlantis. Hugh de Payens was well educated. He was the Count of Champagne. He knew of Plato. He knew the Greek philosophers' stories of a great island called Atlantis that sank into the sea. But to him, and to most people, they were just stories, philosophical parables. The Brotherhood smiled. They said that Plato, in fact, was mostly right. But Atlantis was not just one city. It was not even just one island. It was a global civilization, a network of advanced cities stretching across the planet. And each city was connected by a transportation technology that, to the medieval mind, once again, could only be described as magic. The story became almost too much to believe, overwhelming. But the Brotherhood was not yet finished with the most important part. They said that although the civilization was destroyed, the ancient artifacts of Atlantis still survived. They were still here, buried, forgotten, and they still possessed their original power. The power to travel vast distances instantly, the power of instantaneous communication, the power to heal the human body, and perhaps even the secret to immortality. If these artifacts were discovered, they would be the most powerful and dangerous devices on Earth. De Payens, a pragmatist of war and politics, understood immediately. He said that any kingdom, any nation, any religion would kill without hesitation to gain access to that power. The Brothers of the East agreed. The technology of Atlantis, which had once brought peace and prosperity, now, in a world full of greed and war, would only bring destruction. It absolutely could not fall into the wrong hands. And so, Hugh de Payens was offered a task, a sacred mission. Find those artifacts, bring them back to Europe for safekeeping. Hugh and the 8 men who accompanied him agreed immediately. Right then and there they formed a secret brotherhood, an oath binding them together. But where would they begin their search? The world was vast. The Brotherhood answered. They said the knights would find the artifacts, hidden beneath the former site of King Solomon's temple, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The knights had to act fast. The Holy Land was a dangerous place, a powder keg waiting to explode. Jerusalem had been captured by the Christian Crusaders in 1099, but no one knew how long they could hold it. And there was another problem. It wasn't just the knights who knew about the artifacts. Others, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim groups, were also searching. Perhaps they didn't know what they were looking for, but they knew something powerful was buried beneath the holy city. So, when the knights arrived in the Holy Land in 1120, they established their headquarters right where Solomon's temple once stood. They became officially known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. The Knights Templar, and the knights played their part perfectly. Brave warrior monks, protecting Christian pilgrims on the arduous road to the Holy Land. That was the story they told the world. But while some Knights Templar guarded the walls of Jerusalem, other knights were digging beneath it, day and night. They dug in absolute secrecy. They dug until one day they struck gold. Literally, the brothers of the East had been right. They had promised the Knights Templar that if they dug beneath the Temple Mount, they would find the artifacts that once belonged to the great civilization of Atlantis. And the first thing they found was a large chest made of acacia wood and pure gold. There was no doubt they had found the legendary Ark of the Covenant, and then they found 5 more. Year after year, for nearly a decade, the Knights Templar secretly brought out from the earth beneath Jerusalem treasures far beyond gold or jewels. They found the Spear of Destiny, the Holy Grail, and something perhaps even greater than all of them, the Emerald Tablet. Along with it were pages upon pages of ancient, esoteric wisdom. From these texts, they learned the truth. Not just one, but 10 Arks of the Covenant had been created. They had only found 6, and these arks were not mere religious relics. They were machines. They learned that these arks were used in combination with the pyramids, placed at strategic locations across the planet to create an infinite source of energy. Inside the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid of Giza, there is a granite box. Mainstream Egyptology calls it a sarcophagus, used to hold a mummy. But no mummy was ever found there, and the dimensions of the box are too small to comfortably hold a human body. But it is the perfect size to hold one of the Arks of the Covenant. The Knights Templar, through the ancient texts, discovered that the pyramids were not tombs. They were built for one specific purpose, to house the arks. And the arks, they were built to store something called manna. In the Bible, manna is a mysterious food source that appeared for the Hebrews in the desert. It was described as fine flakes like frost on the ground, but according to Templar lore, the truth was far more complex. Manna didn't just appear. The ancient Israelites and the Atlanteans before them had learned how to extract manna from plant and animal matter and turn it into a white monoatomic powder. A white powder that provided energy. This manna acted as a superconductor. When placed inside the arks and amplified by the precise architecture of the pyramids, it created energy. Unlimited energy. Clean energy. Enough to power their entire thriving civilization. And these alchemical secrets, how to create manna, where did they learn them from? From the Emerald Tablet itself. The tablet gave detailed instructions on how to extract manna, even from animal bones. The manna could then be used for energy, or even to heal sickness. The Emerald Tablet also contained instructions on how to create the Philosopher's Stone, which was said to grant immortality. Some of these ancient texts even spoke of creating manna from gold. When manna was extracted from gold, it could be used to make objects lighter, to levitate objects, anti-gravity. Now think about this. The Ark of the Covenant is described as a box nearly 4 feet, about 1.2 meters, long and 3 feet, about 0.9 meters wide. It was made of wood and covered in pure gold both inside and out. Gold is an extremely heavy metal. Inside the ark, it also held the 10 Commandments, etched on tablets of stone. Stone is also very heavy. The weight of the gold alone would be nearly 1,000 pounds, about 450 kilograms. That's not counting the weight of the stone and wood. And yet, the Bible describes only 4 men being needed to carry it. And an interesting detail, the men who carried the ark were Levites. Levite, levitation. A linguistic coincidence or a hidden clue? But the greatest, and perhaps most disturbing, treasure the Templars found were very ancient texts. Texts that predated even the civilization of Atlantis. These documents spoke of a non-human race. A race that had come to Earth long ago and had enslaved humanity thousands and thousands of years ago for one single purpose, to mine gold. They were called the Anunnaki. Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. In the texts of the ancient Sumerians, they were the gods who were worshipped. But according to the documents the Knights Templar discovered, they were a race. Very real. Very flesh and blood. And they were not from here. These texts told of a planet beyond Neptune, a planet with a massive elliptical orbit, taking thousands of years to complete one revolution around the sun. Its name was Nibiru. The Anunnaki came to Earth around 450,000 years ago. They did not come to conquer. They came out of desperation. They were searching for a specific resource, gold. Not to make jewelry or hoard wealth, they needed gold to save their planet. The atmosphere on Nibiru was disintegrating, and they had found a technological solution. Grind gold into a fine white powder, like manna, and disperse it into their stratosphere, creating an artificial shield to retain heat and air. They found gold in abundant reserves on Earth. And so they settled. They established large-scale mining operations. But the work was incredibly arduous. And after thousands of years, the lower-ranking Anunnaki, who had to work in the mines, rebelled. They needed a labor solution. So, they created one. Using their knowledge of genetic engineering, they took a primitive hominid species evolving on Earth and altered them. They accelerated evolution, creating Homo sapiens. They created us in their image to be a workforce. Imagine, for Hudipayans and his knights, men of 12th century faith, what this discovery meant. The entire story of human origins, everything they had been taught, was turned upside down. But these texts weren't just history. They were instruction manuals. The Knights Templar now understood. They knew why the Atlanteans and the Israelites after them were obsessed with creating manna from gold. They didn't invent this technology. They inherited it. They learned it from the Anunnaki. They knew that this monoatomic gold powder wasn't just for repairing atmospheres. It could be ingested into the body. It could heal. It could extend life. It could be used to power machines. And it could be used to manipulate gravity, allowing the lifting of enormous stones with ease. And suddenly the Knights Templar began to see the connections everywhere. In the Sumerian texts, they read of an alchemical science called Graal, a word that sounded strangely similar to Grail. The Sumerians used a substance called Shem-An-Na, which was used to power the flying chariots of the Anunnaki gods. In the Vedic texts of Hinduism and Jainism, this substance was called Vimana, again used to power divine flying chariots. In ancient Polynesian cultures, they believed in mana, a natural, supernatural force, a spiritual power that could be accumulated by individuals or objects. The Buddhists called it mani. The name might change slightly, but in all these ancient cultures, the definition and the use were the same. Mana was a powerful, real substance, a way for humanity to harness an extremely potent force in nature, a gift or a curse left behind by extraterrestrial gods. And then, the Knights Templar began to recognize their own symbol, the Templar cross. They found it carved everywhere, in every ancient civilization that had ever existed. That symbol was not theirs. They found that cross carved all over ancient Egypt. They found it on Sumerian walls. It seemed to be a universal symbol, representing this ancient knowledge. Knowledge they had just rediscovered, buried deep beneath Solomon's temple. Templar legend tells that this was the symbol of Atlantis, the great civilization destroyed in the Great Flood. The Templar story of Atlantis and the Great Flood was, in fact, identical to every other flood myth we find in every culture around the world. After the fury of the water, a few survivors restarted civilization. They carried with them the knowledge from Atlantis. And the cross, the symbol of their lost homeland, was etched to honor their legacy. When the first 9 knights arrived in Jerusalem and began their excavation beneath Solomon's temple, they weren't just looking for the legacy of Atlantis. They were searching for a buried truth. And not everything they found was from Atlantis. Some artifacts were only 1,000 years old. They came from the time of Jesus. They found ancient texts. These texts confirmed many things written in the Bible. But other texts completely contradicted the Bible. The knights immediately recognized the deadly danger in their hands. There was no way they could let the church know what they had discovered. The Catholic Church at that time was expanding its power with every passing year, an institution that ruled not just spiritually but secularly. If this truth were exposed, it could shake the very foundations of the faith. And the Knights Templar, their newly formed order of protectors, would be immediately destroyed. Furthermore, the hard reality was, much of the Knights' funding came from the church itself. But no historical document could compare to the shock of what they discovered next. It wasn't a scroll, it was an ossuary. This bone box contained the remains of an incredibly famous religious family, all buried together in an arrangement that defied all dogma. The knights found the bones of Mary Magdalene. They found the bones of John the Baptist. And they found the bones of Jesus himself. But they also found the bones of children that Mary had with both of them. To call the Knights Templar's discovery blasphemous would be an extreme understatement. They had discovered documents and artifacts that could literally destroy the church's entire power structure. They knew they had to keep these treasures safe from destruction, safe from falling into the wrong hands, specifically the hands of the Pope. The existence of the skeletons of John, Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and their child meant the end of the Catholic Church. But to rub salt into an already open wound, the knights had found something that might be even more threatening than the physical remains. They had found an alternative belief system. Outwardly, the Knights Templar were Christians, but not in the narrow, rigid sense of most of Europe at that time. And more importantly, not like their king or their employers. Spreading information that contradicted the teachings of the Catholic Church was not only heresy, it was a death sentence. Remember, all of this was happening during the Crusades. Religions were at war. The knights could not speak of their discoveries, but neither could they ignore them. So instead, they hid them. they protected them, and they studied them. This ancient wisdom contained ideas considered blasphemous: the concept of the sacred feminine, reincarnation. Heaven was not a place in the clouds, but a state of mind, and an innate, direct connection to the Creator. The Knights maintained the appearance of being devout Catholics. They had to. Their greatest patron was the Catholic Church. You cannot bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand is the most powerful on earth. But in secret, the Knights Templar were Christian Gnostics. Gnosticism, or the Gnostic belief system, comes from the Greek word gnosis. It means divine knowledge. Other cultures call it enlightenment. The basic premise of Gnosticism is this: spirituality can be found within. You don't need an external organization. There's no reason for priests, monks, saviors, or churches. You don't need them to find God, because He is already within you. One of the earliest Templar documents found beneath the temple refers to God-given rights. Today, we hear that phrase or something similar in the United States Declaration of Independence. But that was the 18th century. In the time of the Knights Templar, the idea of God-given rights meant excommunication, or worse. Only the Roman Church could grant someone rights. Any alternative was bad for business. And instead of worshiping Jesus, many Templars revered John the Baptist. They believed it was John who had initiated Jesus into Gnosticism, inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. To the Knights Templar, Jesus represented a Christos, a cosmic consciousness accessible to anyone, similar to the Buddha. They knew that being born again did not refer to baptism. It referred to reincarnation, that someone, quite literally, would be born once again. With the bones of Jesus, sacred documents, and relics from an ancient civilization, the Knights Templar had more than enough evidence to solidify their beliefs. They wanted to share this knowledge, but it was not the right time. The church was too powerful. They would have to wait until the knowledge could be shared with the entire world, not seized by a pope or a king. And so, after years of digging, the first knights returned to Europe. They carried treasure and knowledge. They hid it, and then they began to build an empire. For 200 years, the Order of the Knights Templar grew and prospered. Their order took root and flourished. From a small band of just 9 soldiers, they expanded into a mighty force of tens of thousands of members, both men and women. The Catholic Church and Christian lords across Europe granted the Templars money, land, and power to assist their cause. They built great cathedrals. They established systems of authority and primitive forms of democracy. But their greatest worldly achievement was something that changed the world forever. They created the first international banking system, a system that, in essence, we still use today. Imagine you are a pilgrim in the Dark Ages. The journey from Europe to Jerusalem is long and perilous. Highway robbers lurk everywhere, ready to take everything you have. The Templars offered a brilliant solution. Along the main pilgrimage routes, they established fortified stations called commanderies, command posts. At any of these locations, you could deposit your gold. In exchange, you received a piece of paper, a coded promissory note. You carried this light and safe piece of paper for the rest of your journey. When you arrived at another Templar commandery, perhaps in another country, you presented that paper and received the exact amount of gold you had deposited. And for each transaction, the Templars charged only a small fee. It was a system used by thousands of people for hundreds of years, and over time, those tiny fees added up. There was a core paradox within the order. Individually, The knights had sworn vows of poverty. Upon joining, one had to surrender all personal possessions to the order. In return, the order would care for you and all its members. But the order itself became unimaginably rich. The treasures and secret knowledge from Atlantis, from beneath the Temple of Solomon, were passed down from generation to generation. Each Grand Master bore ultimate responsibility for keeping them safe, and during those centuries, the Templars became extraordinarily successful at diverting the Church's attention away from their true purpose. Perhaps too successful. Eventually, the Knights Templar had their own army. They had their own fleet of ships. They had their own merchants, builders, and farmers. They became independent and completely self-sufficient. The Templars had become the world's first multinational corporation. They needed no king or country. In fact, the opposite became true. The knights grew so wealthy that even King Philip IV of France was in debt to them, and that sealed their fate. Autumn 1307. King Philip needed funds for yet another war. This time, he would not borrow from the Templars. He would take from them. The Templars had gone from humble protectors of Christianity to a grave threat to the entire power structure of Europe, a threat to both king and church. And like many powerful rulers, King Philip tolerated no threats. So Philip and Pope Clement V devised a plan. Pope Clement, born Raymond Bertrand, happened to be the king's childhood friend. When the previous pope died in 1304, Philip ensured that his friend was elected to one of the most powerful thrones on earth. In short, the pope owed him a favor. Friday, October 13th, 1307. By simultaneous order of the king, hundreds of Templars across France were arrested in a perfectly coordinated raid, including the Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. For 7 years they were imprisoned, they were threatened, and they were brutally tortured in an effort to gain access to their knowledge and their boundless wealth. After issuing false confessions under unimaginable pain, they were found guilty of heresy and sentenced to death. For centuries, history told a simple story. The Church condemned the Templars as heretics and executed them, a tidy ending for an order that had overstepped its bounds. But in 2001, deep within the labyrinth of the Vatican secret archives, a document was discovered. It was called the Chinon Parchment. This document, lost for hundreds of years, recorded in detail the official investigation conducted by 3 cardinals appointed personally by Pope Clement V. And it revealed a truth that upended everything we thought we knew. The Pope had absolved the Templar leaders of heresy. He declared them not to be heretics. They were allowed reconciliation with the Church, and the Pope would permit the Templars to continue their work. But King Philip did not like that outcome. He placed immense pressure on the Pope. Remember, the Pope owed him. So, in 1312, Pope Clement made a political decision. He officially dissolved the Order of the Knights Templar. Technically, they no longer existed, but they were not heretics. However, to Philip, that was not enough. He wanted blood. The leaders of the order, including Grandmaster Jacques de Molay, were later burned at the stake for the crime of relapsing into heresy, a crime the Pope himself had already absolved them of. It was a betrayal of justice in its purest form. In March of 1314, as he was slowly consumed by flames, de Molay pronounced a final curse. With a clear, ringing voice, he summoned both Pope Clement and King Philip before the judgment of God. He promised them that both would die within a year. A few weeks later, Pope Clement died. According to one account, while his body lay in state, lightning struck his corpse. The fire was so fierce that his remains were unrecognizable. By November, King Philip suffered a stroke while hunting and died. He was 46 years old. The Templar curse had come true. France had lost its king. The Church had lost its pope. And Europe seemed to have lost its beloved knights, or so it seemed. When the order of arrest was issued on that fateful Friday the 13th, the Templars already knew. They had spies everywhere. They had known for weeks, and they used those weeks to plan. On October 12th, the night before the arrests began, the entire Templar fleet vanished into the darkness, and on those ships were all the relics of Atlantis, the sacred artifacts from beneath Solomon's temple, and the forbidden texts. Jacques de Molay and about 100 knights volunteered to stay behind. They hoped to negotiate with the king and the pope. They failed in that mission, but they succeeded brilliantly in another: diversion and buying time. Disbanded, but not destroyed. Hidden, but not imprisoned. The Knights Templar, in name, had ended, but their mission continued. The evidence is everywhere. They formed alias groups to avoid detection. In Scotland, they became the Freemasons. In Portugal, they were known as the Knights of Christ. The famous skull and crossbones, the Jolly Roger flag, that flag was first used by the Templar Navy to strike fear into their enemies. But the most compelling evidence does not lie in the Mediterranean. It lies to the north, at Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, built in 1446. Templar and pagan symbols cover every inch of it. On the tombstone of its builder, William Sinclair, the inscription reads clearly, Knight Templar. But there are carvings of plants that 15th century Europeans could not possibly have known. Here is a clear image of corn, maize. And here is the trillium flower. Both corn and trillium are native to North America. Rosslyn Chapel was built nearly 50 years before Columbus set sail for the New World. How could the Templars have known what these plants looked like? Unless they had been there first. Templar legend says that Sir Henry Sinclair, grandfather of Rosslyn's builder, was not only a Knight Templar, but also one of the first Europeans to visit the New World, nearly a century before Columbus. Christopher Columbus himself had close ties to the Templars. His ships, the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, all bore sails marked with the Templar cross. He knew the natives would recognize the symbol and be peaceful, and they were, at least at first. In 1898 in Minnesota, a farmer discovered a strange stone. It was called the Kensington Runestone. The runic characters carved on it, when translated, stated that it had been left by Viking explorers in 1362. And what do Templar traditions say? The earliest Vikings were the Templars themselves. Their treasure was never found. Their knowledge, it is said, still waits, hidden but not lost, protected by an invisible empire still operating in the shadows. On the rugged coast of Rhode Island, here, in 1939, a stone slab inscribed with ancient Viking runes was discovered, a silent whisper from a lost past. Just over 20 kilometers away stands a mysterious structure that defies time, the Newport Tower. What is it? A solid 8-pillared stone structure, standing alone and silent. Rumors passed down through centuries claim that it was built by the legendary Viking seafarers themselves in the 1500s. They say it was an ancient observatory, perfectly aligned to track the solstices, a map of the stars carved in stone. The local museum, of course, offers a simpler explanation. It was merely the foundation of a colonial-era windmill. But the locals don't believe that. Since the early 1800s, records and folklore have credited it to the Vikings. Yet the real question is not who, but why. Why 8 pillars? Why not a single solid column for a windmill? The answer, if we dare to seek it, leads us on a journey far beyond the northern seas, deep into the realm of esoteric knowledge. This path leads us to Gnosticism. For the Gnostics, those who sought salvation through divine knowledge, the number 8 held immense significance. It was not just a number, it represented completion, a sacred wholeness, rebirth. And this symbol does not end in Rhode Island. Let us turn our gaze to Egypt, to the greatest and most mysterious structure on earth, the Great Pyramid of Giza. We are taught that it has 4 sides, a perfect triangle on each face. But from above, at certain times of day, when light and shadow dance across its surface, a subtler truth is revealed. The Great Pyramid has 8 sides. This is no coincidence. It was a deliberate design. It is said that, even to this day, the Knights Templar perform initiation rituals within the dark chambers of that mighty structure. They believe that Egypt was not merely the land of pharaohs, but one of the principal sources of the Templars' original wisdom. Once you begin to look, the number 8 appears everywhere in Templar symbols and architecture, like a golden thread woven through the tapestry of their history. Look at the Maltese cross. 8 points. It was worn by a medieval order of knights. Observe the buildings said to be connected with the Templars. The Temple Church in London, Ely Cathedral in England. Octagonal features and the number 8 are scattered everywhere, hidden in plain sight. Just glance at a few photos of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, a treasure trove of esoteric symbolism, and you will begin to see the number recurring, again and again. Evidence of the Templars is everywhere, encoded in stone and symbol. They are fragments of a much larger puzzle, and we cannot speak of the Knights without mentioning their spiritual successors, the Freemasons. Countless rituals, symbols, and beliefs connect the two groups almost seamlessly. Like the Templars, the Freemasons trace their origins back to the legendary Temple of Solomon. Consider the mysterious Oak Island in Nova Scotia. In 1795, a money pit was discovered there, along with a stone slab carved with symbols said to belong to the Templars. Since then, Freemasons have been involved in nearly every treasure hunt on the island. Both Masonic and Templar crosses are scattered across it. The bond between these groups runs so deep that even today, they still regard each other as brothers. This network extends even further. Another Templar connection lies with Rosicrucianism, a secret order that places great emphasis on the rose and the cross, both core symbols of the Templars. A vast network of secret societies, all linked by common symbols, common origins, and a shared purpose. But why? Why would the Knights Templar spend so much time and fortune concealing their legacy? What are they protecting? The answer is, the Knights Templar have a higher purpose, an ultimate goal. It is to change the world for the better. They knew that the artifacts and ancient knowledge they possessed would shock society. But this knowledge was never meant to be hidden forever. They knew that one day the Knights would share the truth, and that truth may come sooner than you think. This brings us to the modern day, and to a man who claims that time is near. His name is Timothy Hogan. He is the current Grand Master of one of the Templar orders. His mission, he says, is to prepare the world for the revelation of their secrets. He asserts that this knowledge is powerful enough to transform our society drastically, for the better. So where is this knowledge, these artifacts, now? According to Hogan, they are currently hidden in secret vaults around the world. 7 of them, he says, lie within the United States, and he claims the world is almost ready for them to be revealed. He says they will do this in a way that no government, no religion, can ever gain complete control over the information. The release will be managed to ensure that everyone benefits. Because that, he insists, has always been the true purpose of the Templars. From the very beginning, they wanted freedom for all people, physical freedom from kings and spiritual freedom from popes. That was impossible in the 14th century, but today, it just might succeed. We stand at a pivotal point in history. Many people feel that something is coming. They just don't know what it is. A sense of unease, a waiting. Perhaps it is nothing more than humanity's age-old obsession with death and apocalypse, but perhaps it is something more. I think we all know we cannot go on living like this. Endless wars across the globe, hatred within our own nations, dishonesty among leaders, corruption in our institutions. It has to stop. Imagine how different our lives would be if we had access to ancient wisdom and technology. It would be a revolution. We could finally accomplish what Nikola Tesla nearly achieved: free energy for the entire planet. It might take time, but eventually everyone on Earth could have access to healthy food, clean water, and live long, healthy lives, free from sickness and pain. That would be a revolution. Crime, poverty, and war would no longer be necessary in a world of abundance, all because of the artifacts hidden within secret vaults around the world. That would be a revolution, if they are real. There are names whispered through the ages, carrying the weight of myth and mystery. Atlantis. Just one word. But it evokes images of a lost civilization, a great capital swallowed by the ocean, a parable of hubris and divine punishment. For millennia, it has been dismissed as a myth, a story crafted by the philosopher Plato to illustrate a point. But what if a myth is simply a history we have forgotten? What if the evidence of this lost city lies not beneath the waves, but hidden beneath a sea of sand? In recent years, a strange, almost unbelievable geological structure has captured the world's attention. Tucked away in the remote expanse of the western Sahara Desert in Mauritania is a place called the Rishat structure, or as it is more aptly known, the Eye of the Sahara. This is a one-of-a-kind geological feature, unlike anywhere else on Earth. For decades, it has remained a true scientific enigma, continuing to baffle scientists to this day. It is too large, too perfect, yet too remote, almost hidden from history. To most people, even the most curious and inquisitive minds, it remains completely unknown. However, its obscurity is not the strangest part. The strangest part is that this structure seems to match, with astonishing accuracy, Plato's description of the lost capital of Atlantis. Plato described a city built of concentric rings. Specifically, he spoke of 3 rings of water and 2 rings of land. The Eye of the Sahara, with its perfect rings of erosion, is precisely 3 recessed rings and 2 raised rings. Plato described the capital as having an opening to the sea in the south. The Rishat structure has a clear opening on its southern flank. Plato described the city as being built with stones of 3 colors: black, white, and red. The Rishat structure is formed from geological rock types that are precisely black, white, and red. Plato also said the city was surrounded by a vast rectangular plain. And once again, the Rishat structure sits at the south end of a rectangular plain stretching for hundreds of miles. These coincidences are enough to make anyone pause, but they are just the tip of the iceberg. New evidence, unearthed from historical documents and scientific studies, is painting an even more incredible picture, one that suggests this could be the most sought-after location in human history. To begin, we must look to the past. The ancient Romans were famous for documenting everything. The Caesars went to great lengths to accumulate knowledge from every place their vast empire touched. That is why it is so surprising to learn of a man named Pomponius Mela. Living some 2,000 years ago, he was the first Roman geographer. He created a complex map of the known world at the time, titled The Inhabitable World of Pomponius Mela. This is not the map of Herodotus, the 2,500-year-old Greek historian some may have heard of, a map that also lists Atlantis in West Africa, but whose origins remain a mystery and are disputed by modern historians. No, Mela's map is real. It has been validated. When we examine this verifiable 2,000-year-old map, it is originally oriented toward the east. But if we rotate it to the familiar north-south orientation, the features of Europe, West Asia, and North Africa become clear. Now, let us focus our attention on the northwest region of the Sahara Desert. Hidden in the annotations, we find a name that sends a chill down the spine. It reads Atlantia, or Atlantier. Essentially, the Atlanteans. Right there, on a 2,000-year-old Roman map, in the same geographical region as the mysterious Rishat structure, we find a direct reference to the lost civilization. A coincidence? Perhaps. But when combined with the concentric rings, the opening to the sea, the three-colored stones, a picture begins to form. And this is only the beginning. The real evidence, the evidence that changes everything, lies not just on old maps, but locked within the very soil that has provided wealth to this region for millennia. The geographical coincidences are curious enough, but a great civilization is also defined by its wealth and resources. Atlantis, according to Plato, was an impossibly wealthy empire. For centuries, the Sahara has been seen as a barren wasteland, but its hidden history tells a different story. Consider a little-known document, a British document from 1851 regarding preliminary treaties on the resources of ancient Mauritania. What it reveals is astonishing. The document describes this land, the very land of the Rishat structure, as having gold in considerable quantities. It even states, and I quote, "A fact well attested that before the discovery of America, Europe was supplied with a large quantity of gold from Mauritania. This fact has been forgotten by history. How rich in gold was Mauritania? Think about this. A few hundred years ago, a king named Mansa Musa of the Mali Empire, an area that included modern-day Mauritania, was said to be the richest man in human history. His wealth surpassed the richest billionaires alive today. He owned gold mines that accounted for more than half of the world's gold supply today. This immeasurable wealth came from the very land we are examining. But that 1851 treaty didn't just mention gold. It also described ancient Mauritania as having an abundant source of ivory. This is a critically important detail, because Plato specifically recorded that the island of Atlantis had a great number of elephants, and once again, the evidence emerges. Right in the area surrounding the Richat structure, ancient cave paintings have been found, depicting exactly elephants. These great animals once roamed the land that is now desert. Gold, ivory, exactly as Plato described. However, skeptics still point to one obvious problem. The Rishat structure today is an arid, desolate place. Plato, in contrast, described the central island of Atlantis as having geothermal properties. He said it had hot springs, as well as cold freshwater springs. This is why many have dismissed Rishat. How could such an arid place be Atlantis? The answer lies in a little-known scientific study from the late 1990s. a study focused on the Rishat structure itself. That study described Rishat as a hydrothermal complex. Let that sink in. A hot spring, by definition, is a hydrothermal anomaly. To have an actual scientific study confirm this unique and specific feature is truly significant. It shows that beneath the surface, the geological nature of Rishat is a perfect fit. We must imagine what this place looked like. Not as it is today, but 11,000 to 12,000 years ago, at the time of Atlantis. And when we talk about that time, the picture becomes even clearer. Plato described another key detail. Atlantis had impressive mountains to the north. Looking north of the Rishat structure, we see the Atlas Mountains, a majestic mountain range aptly named after the first known king of Mauritania. And this is where the coincidences become almost strange. What was the name of that first Mauritanian king? His name was Atlas, a perfect match for the name of the first king of Atlantis, who was also named Atlas. The mountains to the north, named after the same king. But Plato didn't just talk about mountains. He also talked about rivers. For years, this seemed to disprove the Rishat hypothesis. There are no rivers there. Until now. Recent scientific studies have confirmed the existence of an ancient river, known as the Tamanrasset River, a mighty river that flowed from the Atlas Mountains, meandered for some 500 kilometers, went straight to the Atlantic Ocean, and passed directly through the path of the Eye of the Sahara. A lost river flowing through the desert, right where Plato said it should be. But the most incredible detail is its date. Scientists have determined when this river existed. It is known to have flowed 11,700 years ago, exactly in the time frame that Plato said Atlantis was destroyed. We must not be mistaken. The entire Sahara region at that time looked completely different from what we see today. It was a green, vibrant world, fed by mountains, rivers, and hot springs. But such a green world, how could it be utterly destroyed? How could it vanish from history, leaving a giant eroded scar on the earth? The answer lies in a catastrophe of unimaginable scale, a catastrophe whose evidence is even clearer than the eye itself. The Sahara 12,000 years ago was a green world. The Sahara today is a devastated wasteland. What happened? The evidence is carved into the planet itself, so clear it is visible from space. When we look at satellite images of the entire Sahara, we see erosion. Not the gentle erosion of wind over millennia, but the unmistakable evidence of water erosion on a cataclysmic scale. Gigantic scour marks, hundreds of miles long, as if a giant hand had raked its claws across the continent. Experts in geology, including the respected researcher Randall Carlson, have confirmed this. This is not wind. This is the mark of an unimaginable amount of water, moving with unstoppable force. And the clearest sign lies in the eye itself. These water scour marks, they tear right through the Rishat structure, flowing from northeast to southwest, heading straight for the Atlantic. It appears a massive force of water burst from the Mediterranean Sea, tore across North Africa, seeking the path of lowest elevation, just as water naturally would. And the Rishat structure was directly in its path. But if such a massive flood swept across this land, where did it go? And what did it take with it? The answer lies beneath the ocean. This is where things get truly incredible. There is a little-known but extremely compelling scientific study that has revealed a massive landslide on the ocean floor, off the coast of Mauritania. It is called the Mauritanian Slide. This was not a small event. It is one of the largest known sediment movements on Earth, and scientists have dated it. This slide occurred around 11,000 years ago. Once again, exactly in the time frame of Atlantis. But what caused it? The study believes it was created by a tsunami. Look at the shape of the slide. Look at how the debris fans out. Its widest point is in the east, and it narrows to the west. This indicates a massive force originating from the east, from the land, pushed an unbelievable mass of sediment out to sea. And when I say massive, I mean unimaginable. From east to west, this debris field stretches 300 kilometers, or nearly 200 miles. That is 25% wider than the maximum width of the Florida Peninsula. It is nearly the distance from Washington, D.C. to New York City. And where is it located? It is located directly in front of the path of the Rishat structure. Think about this. Plato said Atlantis was destroyed in one terrible day and night by earthquakes and floods, and sank into the sea. If the Rishat structure was indeed the location of the capital of Atlantis, then a horrific land-originating tsunami swept over it and pushed the remains of the city, the civilization, and billions of tons of earth out into the Atlantic Ocean, creating this 200-mile-long debris field. The true ruins of Atlantis may not be in the rings of the eye. They may be in that debris field, buried under a layer of sediment, at least several thousand meters, or more than a mile, thick. The big question is, what on earth could cause such a cataclysmic event? And do we have more proof that the ocean did indeed invade the Sahara far more recently than mainstream science claims? There is one major hurdle, one scientific fact that seems to disprove everything we've seen. Mainstream science tells us the last time the Sahara was under the ocean was during the Trans-Saharan Seaway, but the date for that event is estimated to be 56 to 66 million years ago, basically the time of the dinosaurs. And here is the crucial detail. When you look at maps of this ancient seaway, its flow did not go west through the Rishat structure. It went south. This implies that whatever happened to Rishat, whatever flow of water tore through it, was a different event, a separate event, an event that somehow has escaped the notice of scientists and researchers until now. This is the irrefutable evidence. The smoking gun. Let us move eastward, following the path of watery destruction. There we find Emikusi. This is the largest volcano in the Sahara, rising to 11,300 feet, or over 3,400 meters. Its location is stunning. It lies directly in the clear path of that cataclysmic water flow, exactly like what we see at the Rishat structure. You can clearly see the path the water took as it swept over it. Scientists have dated this volcano. It itself is 2 million years old. But that's not the important part. The important part is this. The last known lava flow poured out at the southern end of the Emikusi crater around 12,000 years ago. Now, look closely. You can clearly see the path the water took. A flow of water that eroded and erased parts of that 12,000-year-old lava flow. The implication of this is profound. If the water erased the 12,000-year-old lava flow, then that flood must have happened after 12,000 years ago. This is concrete proof. It proves that the ocean swept across the Sahara much more recently than the 56 million years we've been told. It happened precisely in our era, in the time frame of Atlantis. But the evidence doesn't stop there. The story gets stranger. Inside the Emikusi crater, at an altitude of over 11,000 feet, there is a clearly visible white stain. It is not snow. The climate is too hot. It is salt. This salt is believed to be the remnant of an ancient lake, a lake that disappeared only a few thousand years ago. a saltwater lake on top of an 11,000-foot volcano in the middle of the desert. And here is the final detail, the one that defies all rational explanation. Hidden within those ancient salt deposits, scientists have found small aquatic life, specifically gastropods, snails, slugs, and other tiny creatures. Let us pause and reflect on that. We have a perfect circular structure that matches Plato's description on a 2,000-year-old map that reads, "The Atlanteans," at a location with gold, elephants, and a lost river that flowed 11,700 years ago, proven to be a hydrothermal complex, with a mountain range to the north named after King Atlas, cut through by a cataclysmic flood that created an 11,000-year-old tsunami slide offshore, a flood proven to have happened after 12,000 years ago by a volcano. And on top of that volcano, we find the remnants of marine life. How did tiny aquatic life forms find their way to the top of an 11,000-foot volcano in the middle of the Sahara Desert? Unless they didn't climb. Unless they were brought there by a cataclysmic event, a massive wall of water, a great flood that submerged the continent high enough to fill the crater, before receding and leaving a world forever changed. The evidence is before us, forgotten beneath the sand and hidden in plain sight. The eye of the Sahara may not just be a geological mystery, it may be the memorial of a lost world. In some ancient craters, scientists have found evidence of salt water, carbon dated to about 14 to 15,000 years ago. How did they get there? And more importantly, where did that salt come from? Because, make no mistake, this massive amount of salt water clearly had to have appeared after the volcano erupted. Certainly not before. Now let me take you to a specific place, a place that many believe is the very epicenter of the greatest legend of all, the Rishat structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara. When observed from the air, it looks like a giant ancient eye staring into the cosmos, and when we look closer, even closer, we see something unusual. All these white streaks are salt. In fact, the entire area around Rishat and Mauritania itself has long been famous for its huge salt reserves. They are still mined and exported to this day. And when you consider that all the areas in and around Rishat, these places with high salt concentrations, also happen to be the areas of lowest elevation, a logical conclusion begins to form. Seawater once settled here and then evaporated. But here is the crucial part. This is the irrefutable evidence. I found another little-known study, a study sharing how aquatic life, including mollusks, and examples of mollusks include oysters, clams, mussels, squid, and even octopuses. They once existed in the brackish waters inside the Rishat structure, and here is the most important detail. These samples have dates ranging from 15,000 to 7,700 years ago. This proves that the Rishat structure was flooded with water at the exact time Atlantis was said to have been destroyed, 11,600 years ago. That number fits perfectly within the scientific evidence's time frame. Let that sink in for a moment, because its implications are enormous. And if everything I've shared so far isn't convincing enough, wait for the next arguments. To understand the depth of this mystery, we must return to the source of the story. The legend of Atlantis, in fact, originates from ancient Egypt. It was the Egyptians who claimed that they were colonists, the last survivors of a great civilization, a civilization that was destroyed in a great flood. This is the very birthplace of the Atlantis legend, a detail that most people are completely unaware of. And when you consider this next remarkable fact, a fact only recently discovered, the pieces begin to fit together astonishingly well. At the exact time of Atlantis, the Sahara Desert was not the barren wasteland we know today. It was a lush, tropical landscape, a green paradise. Recall the descriptions of Atlantis, a fertile island with exotic fruits and vegetation, a place of luxurious hanging gardens. When you pair the fact that the Sahara was once a lush, tropical environment, at that exact time, this similarity is more than just coincidental. It further reinforces the possibility. And listen to this. This green Sahara era lasted until about 5,000 years ago, when it began to transition into the arid desert we see today. However, some estimates suggest this transition may have occurred more recently, only about 4,500 years ago. 4,500 years. A curious time frame, because it coincides exactly with the estimated date when the Giza pyramids were built, the end of a green world, and the beginning of a great dynasty. This brings me to another curious observation, an unmistakable visual similarity. The famous Egyptian symbol of the Eye of Horus looks strangely similar to the Eye of the Sahara when observed from above. Of course, many will argue this comparison is a stretch. However, it certainly bears a thought-provoking resemblance, doesn't it? But let's set that aside for a moment. Although the Sahara Desert may initially seem like the least likely place to find the lost city of Atlantis, it actually makes a lot of sense when you connect other key details. For example, Atlantis was said to be busy day and night, rich in commerce, with people speaking languages from all over the world. Now ask yourself, is it reasonable to think that a city so dependent on travel and trade would be located in the middle of a vast, dangerous ocean? Really? Would other, less advanced seafaring civilizations venture out into the middle of the ocean just to stop by a local market to trade ripe fruits, spices, and vegetables? Or is it much more likely, based on all the new scientific data we have, that the North African region, which we know was connected by a vast and diverse network of rivers that, of course, are very conducive to travel, is that not more feasible? After all, new studies related to the lost human civilizations of the Sahara have concluded exactly that. And one other thing worth mentioning, Atlantis was said to be an empire consisting of 10 kingdoms. I would not be surprised if any of the other 9 kingdoms were found in the island chains of this region, including submerged islands such as the Azores. I am just focusing on the capital city, the one said to be made of concentric circles, and the Eye of the Sahara is the only location that matches that extremely specific feature, and nearly a dozen other features. Even the names remain intact. And if everything I've shared still isn't convincing enough, then these next details will put the final nail in the coffin. That the Eye of the Sahara is, by far, the most plausible location for the lost capital of Atlantis. Many have argued that, because the Richat structure is a natural formation, it couldn't possibly be the site. After all, Atlantis was created by the god Poseidon. But when you take a closer look, who was Poseidon? He was the god of the sea, of horses, and of earthquakes. The word Poseidon itself in Greek translates to husband of the earth, or lord of the earth. To me, this seems to be a phrase that was lost in translation, a phrase used to describe what we today would call Mother Nature. If you ask me, that of course makes the most sense. But besides that, we also know that humans, from the very beginning, have always built their structures upon the most unique natural sites, and we still do it today. Furthermore, People will also say that Plato stated Atlantis was west of the Pillars of Hercules, which we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar. This is why many have assumed Atlantis must be found in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. However, Plato did not say west, he actually said in front of. And the first thing you should know is, when you exit the Strait of Gibraltar, the ocean current takes you directly south, towards the Rishat structure. But even beyond that, assuming that an ancient civilization even had seafaring vessels qualified to survive the open ocean, you basically have three travel options upon leaving the strait. You follow the coast on the right, you follow the coast on the left, or you go straight into the endless unknown ocean horizon, at your own peril. So, here's an interesting thing to ponder. If you travel along the coast, with Africa on your left, you would journey southwest for over 1,200 miles, before rounding the West Saharan coastline of Africa. To visualize that distance, it's equivalent to going from New York City to Lincoln, Nebraska. That is not a small trip. I point that out because it is not unreasonable to say that the Richat structure is in front of the strait when you travel by boat. Regardless, Plato never said west. And by the way, another detail people get stuck on is that Plato claimed Atlantis sank beneath the waves. This is why many have long assumed Atlantis must be at the bottom of the Atlantic. However, Plato also described that the destroyed area of Atlantis after the cataclysm included reeds of grass, and that the area was no longer navigable because it was blocked by a barrier of mud. That doesn't indicate anything about being at the bottom of the ocean. Rather, he is essentially describing grassy salt marshes, the kind of marshes we know exist in shallow coastal regions. And even though Rishat is currently at an elevation of about 1,200 feet above sea level, we know that wasn't always the case, because marine life existed in Rishat about 11 to 12,000 years ago. This is why it's worth discussing a geological phenomenon known as isostatic response, or glacial isostatic adjustment. It describes that when ice melts, the significant reduction in weight causes the land, where the ice once was, to rise back up. But then, it causes the land in other areas to subside. This is a possible explanation for the sunken Azores Islands. It's believed the melting North American ice sheet caused that land to rise, and then caused the land in the Atlantic to sink. But if that's true, could it have possibly caused North Africa to rise? I don't know. But another fascinating detail that also follows this line is the note about the antipode of the Rishat structure today. And by the way, if you're not familiar, an antipode is a location directly opposite another location on our globe. Listen to this. The antipode of Mauritania is Zealandia, a scientifically confirmed submerged continent, a continent only just discovered in 2017. And considering that many have hypothesized that what happens on one side of the Earth could potentially affect the location directly on the other side, this detail is well worth discussing. And by the way, I have to give a special shout out to my wonderful friend, Nikki, of the Nikki Anna Jones YouTube podcast, for sharing this thought-provoking detail about the antipode with me. Her channel is an inspiration, with a personality and inquisitive mind you will surely love. Now, a final but important argument needs to be made. Regarding the Richat Atlantis theory, many will say that the measurements Plato provided for the capital's size make the Rishat structure too large. However, I disagree. I would argue that the actual measurements were most certainly lost in translation over the course of 12,000 years. Think about the countless linguistic changes that have occurred over that vast period of time. I mean, nobody speaks Latin today, a language that was once very common, and even the modern English language is only 500 years old, and it originates from Old English. a rather different language, which itself is only 1,500 years old. Make no mistake, language is constantly changing, and getting the measurements right, I would argue, is an incredibly difficult challenge, especially over 12,000 years. Solon himself, who passed the story to Plato, did his best to describe this problem of interpretation. He stated that he would do his best to describe the specific details of Atlantis. And considering that Atlantis was said to be busy day and night, it's fair to say the local population must have been in the millions, just as we see in other busy cities around the world today. Therefore, the city of Atlantis had to be large enough to accommodate a population of considerable size. Note that modern metropolitan areas are comparable to the size of Rishat. For example, the Paris metropolitan area is over 20 miles from one side to the other. The same can be said of modern Cairo. The fact is, lost in translation is a very real thing, because even the ancient Greek word that Plato used to describe the island of Atlantis was the word Nessos. When you study the origin of that word, you find it has 5 different translations. They include not only the word island, but also promontory, peninsula, coastline, and it even describes land within a continent surrounded by lakes, rivers, or streams. This would be a perfectly appropriate word to describe the Rishat structure at that time. When you add all the details I've shared together, I would say that the Pomponius Mela map is probably the least convincing part. It might just be talking about the Atlas people, living under the ancient Mauritanian king of the same name. At least, that's how some people will dismiss this. But again, to me, it seems the name Atlas itself has been passed down and reused, just as people still do with names today. All I know is that the countless details shared are too incredible to ignore. Whether there was an Atlantis or not, whether it ever existed or not, whether the Richat structure is the long-lost site or not. If nothing else, as I said before, the Richat structure should be listed as one of the natural wonders of the world. And not only that, the very nature of the Sahara Desert, the fact that it has clear evidence, that the ocean swept over it far more recently than 56 to 66 million years ago. This should be a topic placed front and center among researchers, scientists, climatologists, and geologists. This is incredibly important. So, I know some will dismiss the possibility of Atlantis and mock the Rishat theory. Wonderful, but we need to talk about the scientific aspect of this. We need an answer. What the hell happened to the Sahara Desert?